The last carriage left at 4:30, and the bride was still standing there, in her wedding gown, alone, counting the wheels on the gravel. 40 minutes earlier, her husband had set down his glass and walked out of the room. Not to change. Not for estate business. Not for any reason he had offered her. She had known. For months before the contract was signed, she had known. Known the way you know a storm is coming, not from the clouds, but from the way the air changes. There was a letter she kept at the bottom of her trunk, tied with a length of blue ribbon, faded now. She locked it in a drawer. She had not yet dared to open it, because she had not come to this house for love. And she had not come for money either. She had come to fix something her father had done. 20 years ago, the candles burned low. Somewhere in the house, a door clicked shut, so small, so final, and she began to count. The last carriage left at 4:30. Cressida heard the wheels on the gravel. Counted them, actually. 4 carriages, 12 guests. 3 hours of polite conversation and warm champagne and people congratulating her on the most beautiful wedding they had ever attended. She stood alone in the great hall of Caldwell Manor and listened to the silence settle. The candles were burning low. The flowers, white roses, someone had chosen white roses, not her, were already beginning to droop at the edges. The silk of her gown, ivory and heavy, had left a faint red line across her ribs where the stays were too tight. She had not eaten since morning. She had not sat down since noon. Her husband had left the room 40 minutes ago. Not to change, not to attend to estate business. Not for any reason he had offered her. He had simply stood, set down his glass, and walked out. The door clicked shut behind him. That sound. So small, so final. Cressida looked down at her hand. The ring was gold, simple, perfectly fitted. It had been chosen by Mr. Sylvester Quine, the Ashcroft family solicitor, who had written to her father's estate 3 weeks prior with a list of specifications. Weight. Carat. Appropriate for the station. Nothing about her taste. Nothing about what she might have wanted. She had not expected anything different. She had known, after all. She had known for months before the contract was signed. She had known in the way you know a storm is coming. Not from the clouds, but from the way the air changes. Goes still. Turns heavy. The way everything holds its breath before the thing arrives. She had known, but knowing is one thing. Standing in a borrowed hall in a dress that cost more than most men earned in a year, wearing a ring chosen by a stranger, listening to the silence where a husband should be. That is something else entirely. She turned away from the extinguished candelabra, walked to the tall window at the end of the hall. Outside, the November grounds were dark and bare, the oak trees stripped of their leaves, the gravel drive pale and empty in the last gray light. She had come a long way to stand at this window. Farther than the journey from London. Farther than anyone in this house knew. 3 weeks before the wedding, Cressida had been shown into the London house on Cavendish Square by a butler who did not smile. The house was imposing. Dark furniture, darker portraits. A staircase that curved upward into shadow. Everything chosen to communicate one thing and one thing only, power. She had worn her best day dress, rose-colored, soft. She had told herself it made her feel brave. Maybe it did. Maybe she was lying to herself even then. Dorian Ashcroft, 7th Duke of Caldwell, was standing at the window when she was shown into the study. He did not turn immediately. He let her stand there for a moment, long enough to feel it. Before he turned, he was tall, dark-haired, a jaw that looked carved rather than grown, eyes the color of a February sky, cold, not cruel, just cold the way stone is cold, not because it means to be, but because warmth was never its nature. He looked at her the way a man looks at a balance sheet. He did not offer her tea. He did not ask her to sit. He said, "There is something you need to understand before we proceed." His voice was low, even. The kind of voice that had never once cracked in public. "I am marrying you because Caldwell requires capital. Your father's estate provides that. You will become a duchess. You will have my name, my protection, and every material comfort this estate can offer." He paused, not for effect. Just because he was a man who chose his words like weapons, deliberate, precise. "One at a time, but you will not have my heart. That belongs to another. It has for many years. She comes first, in every matter of consequence. Do you understand?" Cressida felt each word land, small, clean, like a letter opener, not a sword. The kind of cut that does not bleed immediately. It waits. Finds you later, when you are alone and the bravery has worn off. She had known about the rumors, of course. All of London knew. Dorian Ashcroft and Lady Philippa Merrow, the beautiful young widow at Merrow House, 4 miles east of the Caldwell estate. They said he had loved her for years, before her marriage, during it, after. They said he visited her constantly. They said he would never truly belong to any other woman. They said a great many things in London drawing rooms. Cressida had listened to all of it and filed it away and told herself it did not matter. The contract was practical. The purpose was clear. She was not marrying for love. She was not marrying for love. She stood very still in that study, with the rose dress and the brave feeling that was starting to feel less brave by the second, and she looked at Dorian Ashcroft's cold gray eyes. And she said, very calmly, "Then perhaps Lady Philippa should pay your debts." The silence that followed was different from the one before it. He turned, slightly. Just enough. And for the briefest fraction of a second, so quick she might have imagined it, something moved behind those gray eyes. Surprise, perhaps. Or the closest thing to curiosity that a man like him allowed himself. It vanished almost instantly. "The contract is signed," he said. "There is nothing more to discuss." She had smiled. That careful, unreadable smile she had been practicing since she was 15. And she had left. Caldwell Manor sat on 400 acres of South Yorkshire countryside, and it was beautiful in the way that old things are beautiful. Complicated. Imperfect. The east dated from the Elizabethan period and the west wing from the Georgian, and they did not quite match, and no one had ever bothered to fix it. Cressida was given a suite in the east wing, of course. The rooms were lovely. High ceilings. Long windows that looked out over the kitchen gardens and, beyond them, the rolling winter fields. Dottie, her maid, a broad-shouldered girl from Lancashire with a cheerful face and a gift for comfortable silence, helped her unpack the trunks, books, letters, a miniature portrait of her father, her mother's pearl earrings in their velvet pouch, and at the very bottom of the second trunk, wrapped in plain brown paper and tied with a length of blue ribbon that had once been brighter, a letter. She placed it in the back of the writing desk, locked the drawer, did not look at it again. Not yet. The Duke's rooms were in the west wing, 412 feet of corridor between them. Cressida counted once, on a restless night when sleep would not come, and the wind was doing something theatrical against the old east wing windows. She was that kind of woman. The kind who counted things when she could not sleep. Paces, candles, the number of tiles in the entrance hall. The number of times she heard his footsteps pass her door without slowing. 17 in the first month, 17 times. Dinner the first evening was conducted in a silence so thorough it had texture. The dining table seated 20. 2 place settings had been arranged at opposite ends, a decision made by the butler, presumably, or by the housekeeper, or by some ancient Ashcroft tradition that Cressida had not been informed of. She sat at one end. He sat at the other. The candelabra between them held 9 candles, which seemed excessive for 2 people who were not speaking. The soup arrived. "Your rooms are satisfactory?" he said, eventually, without looking up from his plate. "Yes. Thank you. The east wing can be drafty in winter. I'll have the housekeeper arrange additional coal." "That's very kind." Silence. The main course arrived. "Do you ride?" he said. "Yes. The stables have good horses. You may use them as you like." "Thank you." Silence. It went on like that. A conversation designed not to connect but to fulfill the minimum requirements of civility. Like 2 diplomats from hostile nations sharing a table at a state function. Technically peaceful, not remotely warm. Cressida had grown up in a house where silence was used as a weapon. Her father, Caldwell Vane, had been a man of enormous intelligence and equally enormous self-containment. He had loved her, she believed, in his way. But affection in the Vane household had always been expressed obliquely, through provision, through opportunity, through the careful education of a daughter who was expected to be useful. She had learned to read rooms, to read people, to hear what was not being said. What Dorian Ashcroft was not saying, across 30 feet of mahogany table, was this: "You are here. You are necessary. But you are not real to me yet. Not yet." She was not sure he believed the "yet" applied. He rode to Merrow House on the 3rd day. Cressida saw him from the window of her sitting room just before 10 in the morning. He was already mounted, sitting a large gray gelding with the easy authority of a man who had been riding since before he could properly walk. He did not look up at the house. He rode east. She watched until the gray was a speck between the bare November trees. Then she turned back to her books. She did not cry. She had made herself a promise about that, and she intended to keep it. But she stood at the window for longer than she should have. Longer than was sensible. Long enough for Dottie to notice, though Dottie had the good grace to say nothing. He was gone most of the day. He returned in time for dinner, smelling faintly of wood smoke, and the cold in his face was slightly different than usual. Something softened. Something she did not have a name for. He told her, over the soup, that Marrow House had good drainage. She told him she was glad to hear it. Silence. There were some silences, she was learning, that were not worth filling. It was Mrs. Calloway who changed things. Or rather, Mrs. Calloway was where Cressida first understood what needed changing, and what she might be able to do about it. She had been walking the estate on her own. Dorian was in London for 2 days, some business with his solicitor, and she had followed a track east of the main gardens that she had not taken before. The morning was cold and bright. The grass was stiff with frost. She could see her own breath. And then she came around a stand of bare elms and saw the cottages, 4 of them. Stone-built, old. The kind of cottages that appear on paintings of the English countryside and look charming from a distance. Up close, they were something else. Roofs that sagged, windows stuffed with rags where glass had cracked or simply given way, a door hanging half off its hinges, a pig trough that had split down the middle and been left that way. A small boy, perhaps 4 years old, was playing in the mud near the well. He had no shoes. He looked at her with the wide, unsurprised eyes of a child who had stopped expecting things to improve. A woman came out of the nearest cottage, bent, weathered, moving with the careful deliberateness of someone whose joints had decided to stop cooperating. She saw Cressida and began to curtsy. "Please don't," Cressida said. She said it quickly, before the woman's knees could bear the indignity of it. "Please, tell me your name." The woman straightened, slowly. "Calloway, Your Grace. Agnes Calloway. My husband tenants the East Field. How long has it been like this?" Mrs. Calloway looked at her with the measured gaze of a woman deciding how much truth to offer a stranger. Then she made her decision. "Since the old Duke's time, Your Grace." There was never enough, and then there was less. The new Duke, she paused, chose her words carefully. "He has his own burdens." Cressida looked at the child in the mud. Something moved through her. Not pity. Pity was soft, and this was harder than that. This was the feeling that had run her father's accounts for 2 years after his first illness. The feeling that looked at a problem and immediately, almost involuntarily, began calculating solutions. "How many families?" she said. 7, in the East cottages. 4 more toward the mill, 11 families. She ran the numbers in her head without thinking about it. Thatching, glazing, basic timber repairs, shoes for the children. A proper repair to the well, which she could see from here was not drawing clean. It was not, when she added it up, an impossible figure. It was, in fact, a figure she had. Her settlement, the portion set aside for her personal use under the terms of the marriage contract, was sitting in a London account, drawing unremarkable interest. It had been placed there by her father's solicitor, with the quiet understanding that a duchess would need pin money for bonnets and charitable subscriptions, and the other peripheral expenses of a life at the top of the social order. Her father had been, among other things, an extremely thorough man. Cressida looked at the child in the mud. She looked at Mrs. Calloway's careful, weathered face. She said, "I'll need to speak with the estate manager. Do you know where I might find him?" She did not ask Dorian's permission. She had thought about it, briefly, in the logical part of her mind that liked to work through problems from all sides. She had considered asking. She had considered writing him a letter in London. She had considered waiting until he returned and raising the matter over dinner, and then she had decided, no, it was her money. The contract was explicit, and there was something else. Something less rational that she did not fully examine at the time. Some small, stubborn part of her that needed to do this one thing without waiting for a man who had made it clear she would always be waiting. She met with the estate manager, a sensible man named Bramford, and asked him for a complete survey of the tenant properties. He produced it within 2 days, a document that had clearly been sitting in a drawer for some time, waiting for someone to ask the right question. She hired local laborers. She arranged for thatching material. She wrote to a glazier in the nearest market town and negotiated a price that made Bramford blink. She spent 3 days of the following week at the East cottages herself, not directing from a distance but present, making decisions, solving problems as they arose. The children watched her from doorways. Mrs. Calloway brought her tea in a chipped cup and didn't say anything, but her eyes said quite a lot. By the end of the second week, 4 roofs had been rethatched. The well had been cleared and remortared. 6 windows had new glass. 12 children had new shoes. She had gone to the village herself for that last part, taking measurements with a piece of string and a notebook. She did not do it for gratitude. She did it because she needed to be useful. Because the alternative was sitting in the East Wing, listening to the silence and counting his footsteps and thinking about a woman she had never met who lived 4 miles east and apparently held the only key to whatever Dorian Ashcroft kept inside, that locked and frozen chest of his. Purpose, she had found, was a more reliable comfort than hope. He came back from London on a Thursday. He had been gone 4 days. She had not expected to notice his absence with any particular clarity, but she had, in the way you notice a draft stopped. A persistent, low-level thing, suddenly resolved. She was coming in from the East Cottages when she heard him in the entrance hall. Late afternoon, the light already failing, going amber and thin, she was wet. It had started raining an hour ago, and she had not had the presence of mind to turn back, because Mrs. Calloway had been explaining a problem with the drainage channel behind the northernmost cottage, and solutions do not pause for weather. She was unwinding her cloak when he came out of the corridor to her left. He stopped. She stopped. They looked at each other across the entrance hall. She was, objectively, a sight. Hem darkened with mud, hair coming loose from its pins. Hands reddened from the cold. "You are wet," he said. "It is raining," a pause. He seemed to be doing some internal calculation. "You have been out all day." Yes, he was looking at her differently than usual. She couldn't have said exactly how, only that it was different. Less through her, more at her. "Bramford tells me there is new thatching on the East Cottages." "Yes, I did not authorize any expenditure." Cressida met his gaze without flinching. She had been practicing that particular steadiness for most of her adult life, and it had never been more useful than now. "You did not need to. I used my own settlement. The contract is explicit about what I may dispose of at my own discretion." He was quiet for a moment, not angry. She had expected anger, or at least the cold, measured version of it that seemed to be his primary emotional register. But this was something different, something she did not have a name for yet. "Why?" he said. She looked at him, straight. "Steady, because they were cold," she said. "And because I could," she walked past him. Up the staircase. She did not look back. If she had, she would have seen him standing alone in the entrance hall, watching her go, with an expression that had no category in the vocabulary she had built for him. November became December. The season arrived at Caldwell the way it always did in the north. Not gradually, but all at once, as though winter had been waiting just beyond the tree line for the right moment to come in. The days were short and gray and cold. The evenings were long. Cressida had developed a routine. Mornings she spent on the estate, with Bramford, with the tenants, sometimes at the small village school where she had begun contributing supplies, and occasionally, when the schoolmaster was ill, lessons. She was not, she had learned, a natural teacher. She was too brisk, too efficient. The children looked at her with expressions that suggested they found her faintly alarming. She was working on it. Afternoons she spent in the library. Caldwell's library was the best thing about the house. It was a long room on the second floor of the West Wing, lined floor to ceiling with books that had been accumulating for 2 centuries. It had 3 large windows that faced south, and on the rare, clear afternoons it was filled with a pale, cold, winter light that she found inexplicably comforting. She read agricultural journals. She read estate management texts. She read, with rather less practical application, 3 novels that she had brought from her own collection, and 2 more that she found on the shelves, stuffed behind volumes of parliamentary debates, apparently placed there by someone who had needed to hide something frivolous and chosen an excellent location. She was in the library on the afternoon when she first understood that something had shifted. She was not sure when, exactly, he had begun appearing, but he had. First, a question about the Eastfield drainage, which she answered from the Bramford survey she had memorized. He had looked mildly startled by the precision of it. Then, a question about the mill lease renewal, which she had opinions about, that she offered plainly and without apology. He had listened without interrupting, which she noted. Then, he had come in on a Tuesday afternoon, sat down in the chair by the south window. Not her chair, a different chair. As though he was observing the rules of a territory he was not quite certain he had been invited into, and opened a ledger. He had not said why he was there. She had not asked. They had sat in companionable, or at least silent, parallel occupation for 90 minutes, and when she had risen to leave for dinner, he had said, without looking up, the mill lease. "You were right about the subclause," she had said. "I usually am." She had not meant it to sound quite so dry, but she did not take it back, and something, the very faintest, most reluctant thing, had moved at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, nothing so dramatic, more like the memory of one. She held on to that for a long time afterward, the memory of a memory. Christmas came and went quietly. There was a dinner for the local gentry, obligatory, ceremonially stiff, at which Cressida wore a green velvet gown that Dottie had been very enthusiastic about, and played hostess with the composed efficiency she was coming to understand was her particular social gift. She was good at this, at reading rooms, at directing conversation around obstacles, at making people feel attended to without ever offering more than she intended to give. She smiled at everyone. She made sure everyone's glass was filled. He watched her across the candles. Once, for a moment longer than was casual, she noticed. She looked back. His gaze moved away first. She filed that away. He rode to Marrow House on Christmas afternoon. Different horse this time, the bay, not the gray. He was back before evening. He said nothing about where he had been. She said nothing about it either. January arrived wrapped in ice. She had been at Caldwell for 3 months now, 11 families whose cottages were warm and watertight. A morning routine that gave her purpose. A library. Dottie, who brought her tea without being asked, and had a gift for appearing at precisely the moments when company was needed. What she did not have was a husband. She had an arrangement. She had begun, slowly, almost imperceptibly, to stop waiting for it to become something else. Not the loneliness, she had anticipated that, had steeled herself for it, but the stopping. The moment, somewhere between November and January, when she had looked up from a ledger and realized that she was no longer watching the drive for his return. No longer listening for his footsteps. No longer choosing a dress and then feeling foolish when he did not notice. She had stopped hoping and started simply living, quieter, sadder in a different way, but more sustainable. She had not cried once. She had made herself a promise. She intended to keep it. Sir Aubrey Weston arrived on a Wednesday afternoon in mid-January. He was a baronet, young, perhaps 30, with an open freckled face and an easy manner that suggested he had never in his life felt unwelcome anywhere. He rode up the drive unannounced, which Cressida thought either very confident or very oblivious, and was shown in by the butler before she had time to consider whether she was receiving. She was in the kitchen garden, discussing the spring planting schedule with the head gardener, a taciturn Scotsman named Mac Phail, who expressed enthusiasm exclusively through the pace of his planting notes and was currently writing very fast. She heard the footsteps on the gravel path and turned. "Lady Caldwell?" Sir Aubrey said, and he bowed with the cheerful gusto of a man performing a social obligation he genuinely enjoyed. "I do beg your pardon for the intrusion. I'm Weston, Aubrey Weston, from the Croft, the neighboring estate, 4 miles west. I've been meaning to call since October, and I'm afraid my meaning has been outrunning my doing." Cressida looked at him. She said, "Shall I have tea brought out?" He said, "I would like nothing better in the world," and that was that. He was. There was no more precise word for it. Easy. He asked her about the kitchen garden and listened to the answer with actual interest. He told her about his own estate's drainage problems, which were apparently legendary among local farmers, and he was funny about it. Self-deprecating in the way that men who are secure in themselves can be, without it tipping into false modesty. He asked about the tenant improvements she had made and said, with what seemed like genuine admiration, "I heard about the roofing work. Half the county has. The tenants talk, you know." She had not known. Nobody had told her that. She said, "I only did what seemed sensible," he said. "Most sensible things don't get done." "That's rather the point." She laughed. It caught her off guard, the laugh. It came up before she had thought to moderate it. Genuine. Quick. The kind of laugh that is not performed for anyone's benefit. Sir Aubrey looked pleased in a completely uncomplicated way. She was still smiling. The residue of it, the warmth. When she heard hoofbeats on the gravel drive, she turned. Dorian was dismounting at the stable entrance, 40 feet away. He had come back from wherever he had been. She had not known he was riding out today, and he was handing the reins to the groom, and he had seen them. He had definitely seen them. The 40 feet between them meant she could not see his face in detail. But she could see his posture, and his posture had changed. He walked toward them with a stride that was not aggressive, exactly. Controlled, deliberate. The way a man walks when he has decided exactly how quickly he intends to cover a distance. "Weston," he said, and it came out like a card placed face down on a table. Sir Aubrey turned. "Caldwell, your timing is impeccable. I've just been telling your wife that the drainage improvements here put mine to shame." "I imagine they do," Dorian said. It was a perfectly normal sentence. There was nothing obviously wrong with it. But Cressida, who had spent 3 months learning to read the very limited repertoire of his emotional expression, heard something in it that made the back of her neck prickle. He was standing slightly in front of her now. She had not seen him move, but he had. Sir Aubrey extended an invitation to dine at his estate the following week. He included them both, naturally, easily, as though the inclusion of a wife in an invitation to a husband were simply the normal procedure, which it was, which she had not felt it to be in some time. Dorian accepted on their behalf. Without consulting her, she noted that too. Sir Aubrey departed with his horse and his easy manner and his complete obliviousness to any undercurrent in the conversation. She watched him go, then she turned to find her husband standing very close to her. Closer than he usually stood. "You seem to enjoy his company," Dorian said. "He was pleasant," she said. It made a change. She watched something move through his face. Not across it, through it. Something she had not seen there before. "You are my Duchess," he said. "I expect you to remember that." Cressida looked at him. She was not afraid of him. She had never been afraid of him, which she thought perhaps puzzled him on some level, because he was a man accustomed to a certain ambient awareness of his consequence. "I have never forgotten," she said. "Not once, not for a single day." She let that sit. "Can you say the same?" The question hung between them, sharp, specific, the kind of question that cannot be asked back. He said nothing. She walked past him into the house. She kept her steps even, and her chin level, and she did not let herself feel anything complicated until she was behind the closed door of her own rooms. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed, put her face in her hands, not to cry. She had promised herself, but to hold the feeling for a moment. The complicated, contradictory feeling of having finally, for the first time, said the true thing, and having watched him have no answer for it. The weeks that followed were different. Not resolved, nothing was resolved. But the quality of the silence between them had changed, the way the quality of the air changes before a storm. Charged, slightly unstable. Both of them aware of it, and neither one naming it. He came to the library more often. He asked her opinion on things he had not previously thought to ask her opinion on. The East Field drainage, which she had thoughts about. The mill lease clause, which she had more thoughts about. The question of whether the North pasture should be left fallow for a season, which opened a conversation that lasted, unexpectedly, for 2 hours, during which she pulled 3 different references from the shelves and she noticed this, actually wrote something down. She did not relax her guard. But she noticed he learned things about her in those conversations. She could tell. Not from anything he said, but from the way his questions changed. He had learned she read agricultural journals. He had learned she had managed her father's business accounts for 2 years before his death. He had learned that her opinions were not decorative. He did not learn her heart. She kept that locked away in the same drawer as the letter with the blue ribbon. Sir Aubrey Weston returned on the 2nd Thursday of March, also unannounced, also cheerful, also entirely oblivious to any atmosphere his arrival might be generating. He brought his sister this time, a Mrs. Haverford, recently moved to the district, pleasant and well-read, who immediately engaged Cressida in a conversation about agricultural reform that lasted through 2 cups of tea and a plate of shortbread. Dorian was not present when they arrived. He returned from the North pasture 2 hours later, where he had been overseeing some drainage work with Bramford, and found his wife in the garden with Sir Aubrey Weston, who was demonstrating, with a stick and an improvised diagram scratched in the gravel, his theory about why the runoff pattern in the western fields was causing problems. Cressida was laughing, not the polite, managed, carefully calibrated laugh she used in company. The real one. The unguarded one. The same laugh she had laughed in January that had stopped him cold. He stopped cold again. Weston was leaning close to show her something in his improvised diagram. Too close, strictly speaking. The kind of close that a man does not choose unless he is comfortable, unless he is enjoying himself, unless he is interested. Dorian walked forward. Something in the set of his shoulders had changed. Cressida noticed it before he was within 10 feet of them. The way his posture had shifted from the loose, purposeful stride of a man returning from practical work to something more deliberate. "More arrived, Weston," he said. Sir Aubrey turned with his usual complete lack of embarrassment. "Caldwell, you're just in time. I've been telling Lady Caldwell about the drainage issue on my western boundary, and she's diagnosed it in about 4 minutes." "I've been puzzling over it for 2 years, has she?" Dorian said. "The soil composition in that area," Cressida said evenly, meeting Dorian's gaze without expression. "Similar to the north pasture here. The fix is straightforward. I'll have to steal your wife for an afternoon," Weston said cheerfully. The silence that followed that sentence lasted perhaps 2 seconds. It felt considerably longer. "My wife," Dorian said, "has a considerable number of demands on her time." Weston departed with his sister, good-humored and unchanged, and left Dorian and Cressida standing in the gravel garden beside an improvised stick diagram. The silence between them had texture. "He leans close," Dorian said. Cressida looked at him. "He was showing me a diagram, I noticed. In the gravel," she said. "With a stick." He said nothing. She tilted her head slightly, studying him. The way she studied things was she was genuinely trying to understand. "Are you concerned?" she said. "Carefully about something?" A pause. "You are my Duchess." She had heard that before. 3 months ago it had been a warning. Now it had a different quality. She could not immediately decide what quality. "I know what I am," she said. "The question is whether you do." She walked past him into the house, and he stood in the garden with the stick diagram and the silence, and for the second time in 3 months, no answer. Dinner at the Westons was, against all expectation, enjoyable. Clara Haverford was good company. Sir Aubrey was relentlessly cheerful and funnier than his cheerfulness suggested. There were 6 guests in total, none of them particularly concerned with performance, and the conversation moved freely. About farming, about local politics, about a proposed new road that would cut the journey to York by 40 minutes, which generated strong opinions on all sides. Cressida found herself talking and being listened to, and occasionally argued with, which she found considerably more invigorating than being agreed with. Dorian was quiet for most of the first hour. He watched more than he spoke. She was used to that, but she noticed him watching her, specifically, more often than the conversation required. On the drive home in the carriage, they sat in their usual positions, opposite corners, facing each other, the dark countryside moving past the windows. He said, without preamble, "You were different this evening." She looked at him. "Different how?" "At ease," he said. "In a way that you are not always at ease." She considered that. "There was no performance required," she said. "Nobody needed me to be a duchess. They simply wanted a conversation." He was quiet for a moment. "You find it, the duchess performance, difficult?" "I find it effortless," she said. "That is perhaps the more honest answer. I can perform it indefinitely without cost. But effortless and enjoyable are not the same thing." Another silence. "What do you find enjoyable?" he said. She looked at him across the dark carriage. Outside, the Yorkshire lanes were black and narrow, hedgerows close on either side. "Work," she said. "Real work. Problems that require thinking. Conversations that go somewhere unexpected." A pause. The library," he repeated. "Yours is very good. You have not read half of it." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I have read more than half," he said. "The agricultural section has not been touched in 15 years. I can tell by the spines. I have men for the agricultural questions." "You had men for the agricultural questions?" "Now you have me." He looked at her, and the look was different again. The vocabulary of his expression had, over months, slowly acquired new words that she was still learning. This one was not coldness, not distance, not the controlled blankness of public function. She did not have a name for it yet. "Yes," he said quietly. "Now I have you." The carriage reached the Caldwell gates. The horses turned in. The lights of the manor appeared ahead in the dark. She looked out the window. She did not trust herself to look at him, because the thing she was feeling. The warm, fragile, completely unreliable thing was exactly the kind of feeling she had spent 3 months training herself not to have. She was not entirely succeeding. February arrived, and with it a letter from London. She found it on the hall table, forwarded from her father's former solicitors. Addressed to her, in a handwriting she did not recognize. She opened it in her sitting room. Read it once, then read it again more slowly, the way you reread something when you are hoping you misunderstood it the first time. She had not misunderstood it. The letter was from a Mr. Bartholomew Gaunt, acting on behalf of a financial interest he did not name. It concerned a claim against the estate of the late Aldous Vane. A debt, apparently, that had not been cleanly settled before her father's death. The letter was careful and professional, and it did not make explicit threats. But between the careful professional lines, the threat was perfectly legible. If the matter was not resolved privately, it would be resolved publicly, in a court, with documents, with testimony, with the full, unpretty story of what Aldous Vane had done to the Ashcroft family 20 years ago. A story that, as far as Cressida knew, Dorian did not yet know she knew. A story that, as far as she could determine, Dorian did not yet know at all. She sat with the letter in her hands for a long time, counted things without meaning to. The tiles in the fireplace surround, the books on the nearest shelf, the seconds between the clock's ticks. Then she unlocked the drawer in her writing desk, took out the letter with the blue ribbon, laid both letters side by side on the desk, her father's handwriting and a stranger's. The past she had carried in silence for 3 years, and the present closing in on it from both sides. 2 documents that should never have needed to exist, existing because her father had been a man capable of great intelligence and great damage, and had, in the end, known exactly what both of those things had cost. She had promised him she would fix it. She had come to Caldwell to fix it. She had not expected fixing it to involve quite this much. She did not tell Dorian. She told herself it was because she did not yet have enough information. Which was true, partly. She needed to understand the scope of the claim before she could know what resources were required to resolve it. She wrote back to Gaunt the following morning. A carefully worded letter that acknowledged receipt and requested a meeting at a neutral location to discuss the matter. She arranged to meet Gaunt 3 days later at the White Hart, the posting inn on the edge of the village, 2 miles from Caldwell. She told Dottie she was going to call on Mrs. Calloway, which was also true. She did call on Mrs. Calloway first, stayed for an hour, and then walked the extra half-mile to the inn. She met with Gaunt for 45 minutes. He was a thin, precise man with very clean fingernails and a manner that managed to be simultaneously polite and menacing, which she thought probably served him well, professionally. He laid out the claim clearly. She listened without expression. She asked 3 questions. She made him no promises. She walked back to Caldwell in the early dark, thinking hard, and was nearly at the gate when she heard a horse on the road behind her. She turned to Dorian. He was riding the gray he preferred, and he was coming from the direction of the village. He reined in alongside her, looked down from the saddle with an expression she could not immediately read. "You walk to the village," he said. "Yes, alone. After dark? It isn't fully dark yet," he dismounted. He walked his horse beside her without saying anything. She did not say anything either. They walked the remaining quarter-mile to the estate gates in a silence that felt different from the usual kind, less arranged. More present, at the gates, she said, "Good night, Dorian," and walked up the drive. She felt his gaze on her back the entire way to the door. She was in the library at 9 o'clock the following evening, working through the figures from her Gaunt meeting, when the door opened. She did not look up immediately. She finished the column she was on first. When she looked up, Dorian was standing just inside the door, a candle in his hand, the rest of the room dark behind him. He had not changed for dinner. He had been out again, she thought. He looked for him, unusually unsettled. He moved to the table where she was working. He looked at the ledger. She saw his eyes find the column she had been writing in, saw them move over the figures, saw them stop, a name, her father's name, written in her hand in that column as the source of the liability she was working to resolve. She watched his face, and she watched him know, not everything, not yet, but enough, the name, the amounts, the date, the shape of something he had carried for 20 years, appearing in his wife's handwriting in his own library. He raised his eyes to hers. "This," he said, quietly. the way people speak when they're working to stay controlled. What is this? She closed the ledger. Not quickly enough, it is a private matter, she said. An old account. I am dealing with it. That name? He set the candle down. Carefully. I know that name. She said nothing. Aldous Vane. He said it, the way you say a thing you've needed to say for a long time but have never had occasion to. The man who destroyed my father. She held his gaze. Tell me, he said. Tell me what you are doing with that name in your accounts. She did not speak, not yet. Not because she was afraid. She had long since passed afraid. But because she understood that once she said the next sentence, the room would be different. Everything would be different. And there was no knowing yet whether different would be survivable. He waited. He was, at his core, a man who could wait, who had learned patience the way some men learn it, not from temperament but from necessity. She reached into the drawer beside her. She took out the letter with the blue ribbon. She set it on the table between them. He looked at it. Then at her. Aldous Vane was my father, she said. The words fell into the silences of the library, like stones dropped into very deep water. She watched them land. She watched him go very, very still. She held herself steady. Because that was what this moment required. Not defense. Not apology. Just presence. Just the truth. Standing up straight in the candlelight, with nowhere left to hide. She was the daughter of the man who had ruined his family. She had come to his house to fix what her father had broken. And now he knew. He did not speak for a long time. That was the thing about Dorian Ashcroft. When other men would have shouted, would have swept the ledger off the table, would have said something large and destructive and immediately regretted, he went quiet. The way a house goes quiet before the ceiling comes down. Cressida sat very still. The candle between them burned without flickering. The library was cold. She had not noticed the cold before, but she noticed it now. He picked up the letter with the blue ribbon, did not open it, just held it. Turned it over, once in his hands, the way a man turns over an object he is trying to understand the weight of. Then he set it down. Your father? He said. Yes, Aldous Vane. Yes, the man who arranged a loan to my grandfather. Buried the terms in 40 pages of legal language. Called in the debt when the estate was already under pressure. A pause. Each sentence delivered flat, measured. Like a man reading charges from a document. My father inherited that debt at 23. He spent the next 18 years trying to recover from it. He did not fully recover. He died knowing he had not. Cressida said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would change any of that. It was true, all of it. She had read the documents herself 3 years ago, sitting in her father's study the week after his funeral, going through the papers he had left her with a covering letter that began, "There are things you must know about me that I was not brave enough to tell you while I was living." She had read it all. And she had sat with it, alone, for a very long time. Dorian looked at her across the table. Why, he said. Not angry. That would have been easier, perhaps. Anger has a shape. Anger can be navigated. This was something colder. My father's will contained a condition, she said. He wanted to make restitution, not with money. He understood that money was insufficient. He wanted the estate restored, the family. Made whole. As much as whole was still possible, she kept her voice even. Not because she felt even, because this was the moment that required it. He asked me to marry into the Ashcroft family, to use my settlement, my skills, whatever I had, to rebuild what he had damaged, a silence he asked you, Dorian said. And you agreed, yes. Why? She looked at him, and here it was. The question she had not planned to answer tonight, the question she had, in fact, planned never to answer. Because there was the practical reason, the debt, the promise, the condition. And then there was the other reason. The one that lived in a different part of her entirely. The one that was not practical at all. She had not meant to say it. It came out anyway. Because I loved you. The words landed in the quiet of the library with no ceremony at all, no preamble, no softening, just the truth, finally uncontained. I have loved you since I was 12 years old, she said. You pulled me out of the path of a runaway carriage in Cheapside. You would not remember. You were what, 17? A young man in a hurry, doing an instinctive thing. You looked at me afterward to make sure I was unharmed, and the way you looked at me, she stopped, steadied herself. You looked at me as if I mattered, as if the fact of my continued existence in the world was something worth being relieved about. I had not been looked at that way very often. She folded her hands on the table. I never forgot. When my father's will named the Ashcroft family, I chose you. Not Caldwell, not the title. You, the candle threw unsteady light across his face, and his face. She had spent 6 months learning to read his face. 6 months cataloging the very limited vocabulary of his expression. She could distinguish, now, between his version of irritation and his version of concentration. She could tell the difference between the closed-off look he wore in company and the slightly less closed-off look he wore in the library. She did not have a category for what she was looking at now. He said, "You should have told me. Would it have changed anything?" Her voice was not sharp, just honest. "Would you have welcomed me differently, knowing whose daughter I was? Or would you have seen only my father's name and sent me away?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Because the answer, the true answer, was not a simple one. And he was, whatever else he was, a man who did not speak until he was certain. He was not certain. "I need time," he said at last. She nodded. She had expected that. She had prepared for it. He took the letter with the blue ribbon. He walked out, and Cressida sat alone in the library, with the open ledger and the guttering candle, and was quiet for a long, long time. The days that followed were a particular kind of hell. Not dramatic, not explosive. That would have been almost easier. Just absence, and the awareness of absence, and the constant, low-frequency calculation of what absence meant. He did not come to the library. He did not appear at dinner. She ate alone at the vast table. The candelabra had 9 candles, and she was the only person there to count them. He rode to Marrow House twice in 4 days, both times before breakfast, both times returning before noon. She saw him from her window on the second occasion. He was riding fast, head down against the February cold, not the careful, deliberate pace of a man keeping appointments. The pace of a man who needed to move. She understood that impulse. She channeled hers into work. She met with Gaunt again, a second meeting, this time at the village inn, this time with a figure in mind and the intention of resolution. The claim could be settled cleanly. It would cost her nearly the last of her personal settlement. It would leave her with very little beyond what the estate provided. She did not particularly care. It was, in a strange way, a relief. To be almost out of resources. To be nearly at the point where the practical reason and the other reason were the same thing, because there was nothing left to hold separate. She was here. She had no money left to leave with, and she did not want to leave. That last part was the part she did not examine too closely. He found her in the library 9 days after their conversation, 9 days of silence, which she had counted. Obviously, she was working on the spring planting estimates, something that did not require her to think about anything painful, and also something that genuinely needed doing, because MacPhail had presented her with 3 different proposals, and she was trying to synthesize them into something coherent. She heard the door. She looked up. He was standing just inside the threshold. He had a look on his face that she had not seen before and could not immediately name. Something between a man who has made a decision and a man who is not entirely certain the decision was wise. He said, "I read the letter." She set down her pen. He crossed to the table, did not sit, stood with his hands behind his back in that posture she had come to recognize as the one he used when he was keeping himself under control by physical means. "Your father's confession," he said. "The full account of what he did? Yes. He knew exactly what he was doing when he structured that loan? Yes. He understood the consequences. He understood them later. Whether he fully understood them at the time, I can't say. I do know that he spent the last 10 years of his life with it." She paused. He was not a good man in all respects, but he was not a man without conscience. The conscience arrived late. That is its own kind of punishment. Dorian was quiet for a moment. "He is the reason," he said. "The reason Caldwell was the way it was. The cottages, the deferred repairs." He stopped, started again. "My father could not recover the capital. He made choices, economies, that affected the estate for 20 years after his death. The tenants. I know." A long pause. "Is that why you did it?" he said. "The cottages. The roofing. The shoes for the children." She met his gaze. "Partly," she said, "and partly because they were cold." "Both things can be true." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "I owe you an apology." She had not expected that. "Not tonight. For the months prior," he said. "The manner in which I treated the matter of this marriage, the terms I set, the way he seemed to find the specific words difficult. "I was not kind." "No," she said. "You were not." Something in his face shifted, as though he had expected her to soften the agreement. as though most people did. But I understood the situation, she said. You were honest. There is something to be said for that. He moved to the window. Stood looking out at the dark February grounds. I have been honest in some ways, he said. And not in others, she waited. He turned. Lady Philippa Marrow, he said. I owe you a correction on that matter. The name landed differently than it used to. 3 months ago it would have cut. Now it was just a name. Part of the architecture. You don't need to. I do. Quiet. Final. Not tonight. I'm not ready to tell you the full account tonight. But I want you to know that the situation is not what it appears. What the county believes, what I have allowed them to believe, is not the truth. He paused. I will tell you the full truth. When I can do it correctly. She looked at him, and she understood, or thought she understood, or at least she could feel the shape of something she did not yet have all the details of. All right, she said. He nodded once. Then he sat down, not in his usual chair by the south window, in the chair on the other side of her table, closer than he had ever voluntarily positioned himself. He picked up one of MacPhail's planting proposals and looked at it. The north pasture suggestion is wrong, he said. He's not accounting for the drainage runoff from the East Field improvement. She reached for her own copy. I thought so too. Look at the second column. And they worked, side by side in the cold February library, until the candles burned low. When she rose to leave, he rose also, and walked with her, without discussion, to the corridor outside the library, where their paths divided. Her east, him west. He said, "Good night, Cressida," first time. He had never used her given name before. She said, "Good night," and they went their separate directions in the dark corridor. She made it all the way to her room before she sat down on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a very long time. Not crying, she had promised, but feeling things. Many complicated things, at considerable volume. March arrived, and with March came a change that Cressida had not anticipated and did not know what to do with. He was present, not just physically. He had been physically present before, in the way furniture is present. This was different. He asked questions and listened to the answers. He appeared in the kitchen garden on a Tuesday morning and fell into conversation with MacPhail about the north pasture, with a knowledge of soil drainage that surprised her. He attended dinner every evening, and when they talked, actually talked, the kind of conversation that has momentum, that takes turns, that goes somewhere unexpected. She was careful not to read into it. She had been careful not to read into things for months now. It was a discipline she had developed like a muscle. See what is. Not what you want it to be. What was. They were becoming tentatively something like partners. What she refused to speculate about. What that might mean. Then April arrived with the first warmth and a complication she had not foreseen. A man appeared at Caldwell on a Tuesday afternoon, when Dorian was in the North Field and Cressida was in the estate office, with Bramford reviewing lease language. He was announced as Mr. Declan Quill, representing Gaunt and Associates of London, Gaunt's office. But the matter was resolved. She had the documents. She dismissed Bramford and received Mr. Quill alone. He was not Gaunt. Younger, less precisely menacing, but carrying the same quality of professional care. He set a leather folder on the desk. Your Grace. There is a complication, she said. Tell me. He told her. The original claim had been cleared. That was not in question. But in reviewing the Vane estate documents for the settlement, Gaunt's office had discovered a second instrument, an older one, a deposition filed in 1799 by a witness to the original loan transaction, naming both Aldous Vane and the late Duke of Caldwell in terms that were, Quill was carefully neutral, potentially actionable, not by Gaunt's client, by a third party who had recently become aware of the document's existence. If this third party chose to proceed, the dispute would go to Chancery. It would be public. And the nature of the dispute, the specifics of what Aldous Vane had done and how, would become a matter of public record. Cressida sat very still. She said, What do they want? He told her. She said, How long do I have before they move? A fortnight, he said. Perhaps 3 weeks. She thanked him. Showed him out. Returned to the estate office and stood at the window and looked at the April grounds and thought, with the very deliberate, structured precision that was her best quality in a crisis, she could resolve this. She was almost certain of that, but it would require resources she no longer had. Her settlement was gone. She would need Dorian. Not directly. Not yet. She needed to understand the scope of the solution before she could present it. She needed 3 days. She scheduled a meeting with Quill for Thursday evening at the White Hart. She did not tell Dorian. Not yet. 3 days. Then she would tell him everything. She told herself that was sensible. 3 days. That was all. Thursday evening. She told Dottie she was going to call on Mrs. Calloway, which was true. She did call on Mrs. Calloway. She stayed for an hour. Then she walked the half-mile to the White Hart. The meeting with Quill lasted an hour. She had the shape of a solution by the end. It was going to require Dorian's cooperation, and more uncomfortably, his trust. But it was possible. She was walking back through the village in the early dark, her mind still working through the figures, when she became aware of hoofbeats on the road ahead. She looked up. Dorian. He was on the gray, riding toward her. He pulled up beside her and looked down from the saddle with that unreadable, present look. "You walked to the village," he said. "Yes, you told Dottie you were calling on Mrs. Calloway." A pause. "I did call on Mrs. Calloway." He dismounted. He walked his horse beside her. They walked together in the dark lane, the horse's breath white in the April cold, neither of them speaking. Then he said, "Where else did you go?" She looked at him sideways. "Dorian? Where else?" Not a question. Not a demand, exactly. The voice of a man who was very carefully staying calm because he had decided that staying calm was what this moment required, and she could hear the effort in it, which was unexpected. He was a man for whom calm was usually effortless. She made her decision. Not in 3 days, now. She stopped walking. He stopped. The horse stopped. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to listen to all of it before you respond." He looked at her. "Steady. There is a second document," she said, "related to my father's original transaction with your grandfather. I have known about it for 11 days. I have been trying to understand the scope of it before I came to you." She told him. All of it. Quill, the third party, the potential chancery filing, the public exposure, the figure required for resolution, the source she did not currently have. He listened, without interrupting, the way a partner listens. Someone who is planning to be useful. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You were going to wait 3 days?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because I wanted to come to you with a solution, not just a problem." He was quiet again. Cressida. He said her name the way he had started saying it, without formality, without the careful distance of a title. "I do not need you to bring me only solved problems. I need you to bring me the problems." She looked at him in the dark lane. "You're my partner," he said, "not my steward." The words sat in the air between them, simple, clean, entirely unmistakable. She said, "All right." He took his horse's reins in one hand. He offered her his other arm. She took it. They walked back to Caldwell together in the April dark, planning, talking through the second document and its solution with the shared efficiency of 2 people who had been, without quite naming it, building toward this for months. The horse walked patiently beside them. The lights of the manor appeared ahead. She was aware of his arm under her hand, the solidity of him, the warmth of him, even through the cloth. She was aware of a great many things. She was still being careful not to construct narratives from insufficient evidence. She was not entirely succeeding. The second claim took 10 days to resolve. Dorian handled the chancery threat directly, through his own solicitor, Quine, who turned out to have a prior professional relationship with the third party's legal representative that simplified the negotiation considerably. She sat in on the meeting. He had asked her to. Simply, "I'd like you there," no explanation, no qualification. As though her presence at an important discussion were the obvious correct state of affairs. She supposed it was. She kept her expression neutral, and her notes clear, and her contributions specific and useful, and she caught him, once, glancing at her across the table with a look she was, slowly, cautiously, beginning to think she understood. The matter was resolved in their favor by the end of the week. When Quine had gone, they were alone in the study. The fire was burning low. Papers spread across the desk, the whole documentation of the matter, now closed. She began gathering the papers. He said, "Cressida." She looked up. He was standing on the other side of the desk. That familiar posture, hands behind his back, holding himself steady, but his face was doing something new, something she did not have a word for yet. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "I owe you an explanation, and I believe—" He stopped. Started again. "I believe I am ready to give you one." She set down the papers. She sat in the chair, and she waited. Not the waiting of the East Wing, not the waiting of the window. Not the 17 footsteps and the 9 candles, and the man who rode east to a woman she had been wrong about. This was different. This was arriving. He moved to the window. Stood looking out at the April dark, he said, "Lord Piers Ashcroft was my younger brother." She waited. He married Philippa in the spring of 1808. A whirlwind courtship, 3 weeks from introduction to announcement. Everyone thought it was romantic. A pause. It was not romantic. Piers was... He was not a good man in the ways that matter most to a woman living in close quarters with him. He was charming in company. In private, he caused damage. The kind that doesn't show from the outside. She was very still. He died in a riding accident in the autumn of that year. Philippa was 2 months pregnant. She was also frightened of what people would say, of what people would assume once they understood the marriage had been what it had been. Piers had been reckless with money as well as with other things. The child's inheritance was uncertain. She was afraid it would all come out. Everything. He turned from the window. I let people believe I had loved her. Before the marriage. During it, I allowed the rumors to take hold. I encouraged them in some ways. It protected her. It protected Jasper, who was entirely innocent, from being tainted by his father's character. She looked at him. 6 years, she said. Yes, you have let the county believe, the entire social world believes. Yes, and you let me believe it. He met her gaze directly. Yes, he said. I let you believe you were second to a devotion that did not exist. I let you carry that for the entirety of our marriage. He paused. I had reasons. They were not sufficient. They did not account for what it would cost you. She said nothing, because she was feeling a great many things, simultaneously. And they did not resolve neatly into any single response. Relief, that was one. Anger, that was another. Not large, not hot, but present. Quiet and real and entirely justified. And underneath both of them, something that had been very quietly present since February and was now larger, harder to ignore. Refusing, in fact, to be filed away any longer. Why now? She said. Why tell me now? He was quiet for a moment because, he said, I am tired of living in a house with a woman who believes something about me that is false. He paused. And because I understand now what your presence here has cost you. The money. The silence. The management of things alone that should not have been managed alone. He paused again. You came here to restore something my father lost. You used everything you had. And I gave you nothing in return except coldness and a false narrative, she said. You gave me the library. Something flickered across his face. I gave you access to a room, he said. It was more than that. Silence. Dorian, she said his name deliberately. The way he had started saying hers, without formality. What are you trying to say? Precisely, he looked at her. A long moment then. I am trying to say that I have been a fool, a deliberate, self-protected, historically consistent fool. And that somewhere between your first conversation about drainage and the last 3 hours in that negotiation, I have become aware that I would like very much not to be one any longer. Something moved in her chest. She did not immediately trust it. That is, she said carefully, a very measured way of saying something. I am a measured man. You are. A pause. Is there an unmeasured version? She said. He was quiet for a moment then. I look for you in rooms, he said. When I come back from the fields, when I come down to breakfast, when I finish a problem and want to tell someone the answer. I look for you first. She sat very still. I did not plan for that, he said. I have been measuring the distance between us for months. Every conversation, every evening. I have been aware of it moving, and I have not known what to do with that awareness because I built this marriage on the premise that the distance was appropriate. That it was correct, is it? She said. He looked at her. No, he said one word. Not decorated. Not qualified. Just the truth, finally out in the open, standing in the firelight of the study of Caldwell Manor. In April, after 6 months of silence and slow building, and all those nights counting footsteps and all those mornings watching him ride east, no. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, I need you to do something. He waited. Tell Quine the truth about Philippa and Piers. Tell him to begin the process of correcting the record. Not a full public announcement, nothing that would damage Jasper, but enough that the foundation of what might come next is not built on a lie that the whole county believes. He said, Yes, and I need time, she said. Not much. But some, he said, whatever you need. She rose from the chair, gathered the papers from the desk, and walked to the door. She stopped in the doorway. She said, without turning, Good night, Dorian. he said. Good night. She went upstairs. She did not count his footsteps. She sat in the chair by her window and looked out at the April dark and felt all the complicated, contradictory things. And for the first time in 6 months, she let herself feel them without trying to file them away. She gave him 3 days, not because she was punishing him, not because she was playing a game with careful moves and anticipated responses. She gave him 3 days because she was a woman who had spent 6 months learning the difference between what she wanted to be true and what was actually true. And she was not again, not ever again, going to mistake one for the other. So she went about her days. She met with Macphail about the kitchen garden expansion. She attended the weekly market she had organized at the village church hall and spent an hour helping Mrs. Calloway price jars of preserved pears. She sat in the library on the second evening and read 3 chapters of a novel she had been pretending to read for a month. She slept, not well, but enough, and she thought about what he had said in the study. I look for you in rooms. 3 days. That was all she needed. 3 days to stop the noise in her own head long enough to hear clearly. Because the thing about loving someone for a very long time, quietly, privately, without expectation, is that when the object of that love finally turns toward you, the feeling is not simple. It is not a door opening. It is more like a wall you have been leaning against for years suddenly moving, and the first sensation is not joy. It is the terrifying absence of the thing that was holding you up. She needed 3 days to find her feet. Dorian did not press her. She had not expected him to. He was a man who understood silence, who had used it, had hidden in it, had built entire architectures of himself around it. He knew what it meant to need space, and he gave it to her without commentary. But she noticed the change in him, small things. The way he was present at breakfast now, instead of gone before she came down. The way he passed her in the corridor and paused. Not for long, not dramatically, just a beat. The kind of pause that says, I see you, and not the kind that says, I am assessing you. The way, on the second evening, he set a book on the library table next to hers without asking and sat down and simply read, no explanation, no declaration. Just present. She did not look up from her page immediately. She let it sit for a moment, the fact of him being there, choosing to be there, then she turned a page. And they read. On the 4th day, she went to see Philippa. She had not planned it. She had woken that morning with the thought already formed, clear and simple, the way decisions sometimes arrive after 3 days of processing. Not through the rational mind, but through some deeper machinery that works while you sleep. She needed to see Philippa Marrow before she could move forward. Not to assess her, not to confirm what Dorian had told her. She believed him. She had believed him in the study, not because she was naive, but because she had become, over 6 months, very good at reading the specific register of his honesty. She needed to go to Marrow House because she was, above all things, a practical woman. And the practical reality was that Philippa Marrow had been part of the architecture of this marriage from the beginning. She had been the wound, the explanation, the shape of the absence in the middle of everything, and whatever came next. Cressida wanted to walk toward it with her eyes open, not shut. She took the smaller carriage, alone. She sent no word ahead. Marrow House was 4 miles east, as she had always known. She had never been. She had looked in its direction many times. From the window, from the road, from the vantage point of her own imagination. But she had never had occasion or reason to approach. It was smaller than Caldwell. Prettier, in a different way, well-tended. A house that had been looked after by someone who cared about the looking after. She was admitted by a housekeeper who regarded her with the careful neutrality of a woman assessing a situation she had not been prepared for. Philippa came to the drawing room herself. She was 30, perhaps 31, dark-haired, composed in a way that Cressida recognized. The particular composure of women who have learned to be composed because the alternative was not safe. She was not the beauty that rumor had made her. She was something more interesting than that. She had the face of a woman who had survived things and knew it. They looked at each other for a moment, then Philippa said, I wondered when you would come, Cressida said. I should have come sooner. Philippa gestured toward the chairs. They sat. Tea arrived, on request, which suggested the housekeeper was a woman of foresight. He told you, Philippa said. Yes, everything? I believe so. Philippa looked at her hands for a moment, then back up. It was not his fault, she said, what he told people. I asked him to. I was frightened after Piers died. I was alone and I had Jasper coming, and I did not know what people would say if they understood what the marriage had been. A pause. Dorian was the only person who knew the truth. He offered to bear the story. I let him. I have regretted it many times since, Cressida said. Because it was not fair to him. Because it was not fair to you, Philippa said. I knew he would eventually marry. I told myself it would be a society marriage. Something managed and distant. I did not think. She stopped. You did not think he would marry someone who would be hurt by it, Cressida said. Philippa looked at her directly. No, she said. I did not. A silence. Not hostile. Not comfortable. Honest. The way silences can be between two women who have decided, without quite saying so, to be honest with each other. Cressida said, I am not here to make anything difficult for you. Or for Jasper, I know. Whatever is resolved, however the record is corrected, I want you to have considered what you want from it. Not what protects Caldwell. What is good for your son? Philippa looked at her. Something shifted in her face. Something that had been braced, went not entirely but partially, soft. He said you were capable, she said. Cressida blinked. Dorian said that? 2 weeks ago, when he came to tell me that things would be changing, she paused. He said you were the most capable person he had encountered in 10 years of managing an estate, and that he had been too proud to say so directly to you. Cressida sat with that for a moment. Capable, not beautiful, not convenient, not dutiful, capable. It was the most Dorian Ashcroft thing he could possibly have said. And it was, she realized, sitting in Philippa Merrow's drawing room with her tea going cold. More meaningful to her than any conventional declaration might have been. Because it was specific. It was real. It was what he actually thought about her, translated from the language of a man who was still learning how to say what he meant. She said, He told you 2 weeks ago. Yes, 2 weeks before the study. Before I look for you in rooms, he had been working toward it longer than she had known. She drove back to Caldwell in the early afternoon. The April countryside was doing something extraordinary. The hedgerows were coming into full leaf. The fields had gone that particular green that only exists for a few weeks in spring and then deepens into summer. And the light was slanted in gold, and entirely too cinematic for a woman trying to maintain a clear head. She sat in the carriage and looked out the window, and she felt clear. Not resolved, exactly. But clear. She knew what she wanted. She had known it, if she was being honest, for considerably longer than she had permitted herself to admit. The question had never been what she wanted. The question had been whether the ground was safe enough to stand on. She thought it might be. She found him in the north pasture. He was standing at the edge of the drainage channel she had helped design, talking to Bramford, pointing at the far end of the field, with the particular focus of a man doing practical work. He was wearing his riding clothes, muddy at the boots, coat pushed back. Not the Duke of Caldwell performing authority. Just a man standing in a field he was responsible for, trying to do right by it. She walked toward him, across the new grass. Bramford saw her first, said something, and withdrew. Dorian turned. He looked at her across 20 feet of April field. She stopped at the edge of the drainage channel. She said, I went to see Philippa. He went very still. I know, he said after a moment. She sent me a note. I wanted to hear her account, Cressida said. Before I knew what I thought, and I believe you. A pause. I needed to see her to understand the full shape of it, not to verify what you said. But because she was the missing piece, the part of the story I had only ever seen from the outside. He was watching her, waiting, with the specific quality of attention he gave to things that mattered. She said, You told her I was capable. Something moved across his face. 2 weeks before you told me anything, she said. You told her, I was working out how to say it to you. 2 weeks, she said. I told you. I am a measured man. She looked at him across the drainage channel. Dorian, she said, I have 3 things to say to you, and I need you to let me say all of them before you respond. All right, she breathed. First, she said, I am not interested in a marriage that operates on the terms we agreed to in London. The arrangement you described, my name, your protection, material comfort, and nothing else. I fulfilled those terms. I will not continue on them. He said nothing. Waiting. Second, she met his gaze. If you want something different, if you intend what I think you intend, I need it to be complete, not managed, not controlled for appearances or protection or any other purpose. I spent 6 months being a useful fixture in my own home. I will not do that again, still waiting. Third, she paused. The last one. the hardest one. I have loved you, in some form, for half my life. That is not a thing I say easily, or often. In fact, I have said it exactly once, under considerable duress, in a library, and you walked out of the room. She paused. I am saying it again, in a field, without duress, because I want you to have the true version and not the desperate one. Silence. The April wind moved through the new grass. A lark somewhere was making a great deal of noise about the season, then Dorian Ashcroft. 7th Duke of Caldwell, a man who had spent 40 years maintaining a careful, cold, controlled distance from everything that mattered, stepped across the drainage channel, which was not wide. Perhaps 2 feet. It was more symbolic than physical. He stepped across it and stood in front of her close. Closer than he stood in the library. Closer than the corridor. Close enough that she could see the winter gray of his eyes in full, and the particular line of his jaw that she had been looking at for 6 months, and the expression on his face that she was, finally, at last, able to name. She had not had a word for it before, because she had never let herself imagine it directed at her. It was the way he looked at things he valued, fully, without the glass of performance or the distance of protection. The way he looked at the north pasture when the drainage worked. The way he looked at a well-reasoned argument. The way he looked at Caldwell in the mornings, fought from the top altarjury, when he thought no one was watching, like it mattered. Like it was his, not as property, as responsibility, investment, care. He said, I am not going to make a speech. She said, I know, I don't have your facility with words, I know that too. He was quiet for a moment. I have been standing in rooms looking for you, he said, for months, and when you're there, the room is better. When you're not, it is lacking. Something is missing, and the missing thing is you. He paused. I had not understood that a room could have that quality. I had not understood that a house could. Another pause. That a life could. She looked at him. That is not a small thing, she said. No, he said. It is not, she said. The 3 conditions. Do you accept them? He said. All of them. Without reservation, she looked at him one more moment. Then she reached out and took his hand, not a dramatic gesture, not a collapse into his arms, not a kiss in the rain, which would have been appropriate cinematically speaking, but which was not, she thought. Quite right for 2 people who had come to this point the way they had. Slowly, honestly, through ledgers and drainage channels and 9 candles and a great deal of measured silence, she just took his hand. His fingers closed around hers, and they stood in the April field, with the lark still carrying on overhead, and the new green grass and the drainage channel she had helped design between them, and then, now not between them, and neither of them said anything for a while. Because some things do not need saying. What came after was not easy. She had known it would not be. She was a practical woman. She was under no illusions about the work required to rebuild the structural beams of a marriage that had been built on an inadequate foundation. But it was good. That was the word she kept coming back to. Not perfect, not fairy tale. Good, real. The kind of good that has texture. That was earned. Quine was brought in on a Thursday, a week after the North pasture. Dorian told him the truth about Piers and Philippa. All of it. Quine listened with the expression of a man who had suspected something of this order for 6 years and was relieved to have it confirmed. The legal framework for a revised narrative was established. Not a public announcement, nothing that would expose Jasper to scrutiny or harm, but a correction. A quiet, controlled, definitive correction to the record. The kind that moves through a social world the way water moves through limestone. Slowly, without drama, and then completely, the county would know within a season. Cressida was present for the Quine meeting. Dorian had asked her. Simply, I'd like you there. No explanation, no qualification. As though her presence at an important discussion were the obvious correct state of affairs. She supposed it was. Philippa came to Caldwell for tea 2 weeks after Cressida's visit. They sat in the library, which felt appropriate. 3 of them, Cressida, Dorian, and Philippa, in the chairs by the south window, with tea in the April light, having a conversation that was, underneath its surface civility, about the release of a long-held breath. Jasper came with her, 5 years old, dark-haired like his mother, with a solemn expression that broke into sudden, total brilliance when he was interested in something, which was frequently. He stood in the library doorway for 30 seconds, assessing the room with the thoroughness of a small person who has learned that adults are unpredictable. Then he walked directly to the bookshelf, nearest the window. selected a volume he could not possibly read, and sat down on the floor to examine the illustrations. Cressida looked at him. Something moved in her chest. "Quiet, steady," she said. "What has he found?" Dottie, who had followed him in, peered over his shoulder. "Looks like the atlas, Your Grace." "He's found the page with the sea monsters." Jasper looked up at this description of his discovery. He held the atlas up toward Cressida with an expression of absolute seriousness. "Look at this. This is important. Someone needs to know about this." She said, "That one's off the coast of Norway. They say it was as big as an island." He stared at her. Then he looked back at the atlas. And then he stood up and crossed the room and deposited himself and the atlas in the chair beside hers, settling in with the easy proprietorship of a child who has decided where he wants to be and sees no reasons for further discussion. Across the tea table, Philippa was watching. Something in her face was soft in a way it had not been before. Dorian was watching too. He met Cressida's eyes, and she thought, "Oh, this was what the room felt like when everything that was supposed to be in it was actually present." May arrived full and green, and considerably warmer than anyone in Yorkshire had the right to expect. The estate was in its best condition in 20 years. Bramford said so directly, which for Bramford was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The Southfield lease had been renegotiated to advantageous terms. The north pasture was producing. The mill was operating under new management that Cressida had identified, and Dorian had approved, and both of them had quietly been very satisfied about ever since. The mornings were hers and the evenings were theirs. Dinner, which had once been 30 feet of mahogany and 9 candles and silence, was now different. They sat close, they talked. Not always about the estate, about other things, about the books they were reading, the ideas in them, about his years at Cambridge and her father's accounts, and the time she had read the entirety of Smith's Wealth of Nations at 14. Because her father had said it was not suitable for a girl, and she had decided that was sufficient reason. He laughed at that. Actually laughed. Not the memory of a smile she had catalogued in November. A real one. Short and genuine. The laugh of a man who had been surprised by something and didn't mind it. After dinner, they sat by the fire in the east sitting room. Her sitting room, which had become their sitting room without formal announcement. He read. She read or wrote or simply sat with her feet on the footstool that he had placed in front of her chair one evening and never removed. She was happy. The word arrived in her mind one evening in mid-May, startling and clear, as though it had been waiting to be recognized for some time, and was mildly impatient about the delay. Happy. She was happy. Not the large, dramatic happiness of a completed dream. The quiet, sustainable happiness of a life that fits. Of waking up knowing what the day will hold and finding it good. Real. The kind that gets better the longer you are inside it. It was a Thursday evening in late May when he brought the ring. She had not expected it. She had been in the habit of not expecting things. She had developed that habit over a long time, and it had served her well. So she was not expecting anything particular when he came into the east sitting room after dinner and sat in his chair, and then, after a moment, sat forward. She looked up from her book. He was holding a small box. Dark blue velvet. The kind of box that had a specific purpose. She looked at it. Then at him, he said, "I have been trying to find the right moment for 3 weeks. I have concluded that I am overthinking it, and the right moment is simply when it occurs to you that it is right. And it occurs to me now." She set down her book. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, sapphires and diamonds. Delicate. The blue of a winter sky seen through library glass. The precise blue, she realized, of the February afternoon when she had sat across from him at a table covered in gaunt documents and understood that something had fundamentally changed. Not chosen by a solicitor, not specified by function or station, chosen by him. For her, because it was what he had thought of when he thought of her. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. He said, "The ring you wear was selected by Quine, from a catalogue." With specifications, he paused. "That is not the ring I would have chosen," she said. "When did you choose this?" 3 weeks ago." Another pause. When I understood that I wanted to do it correctly, she felt something move through her. Not dramatically, just. The last of the distance, closing, she said, "You once told me that Lady Philippa came first. In every matter of consequence." "Yes. And now?" He looked at her directly. "You know the answer," he said. "I want to hear it," he said. "You come first. You have for some time. I was not ready to understand that until recently. A pause. But you have. You come first. She looked at him. One moment, then she held out her hand. He took it, took the ring from the box, slid it onto her finger next to the other one. She looked at both of them, the old ring and the new one, the contract and the choice. He was still holding her hand. She said, "We should take the other one off," he said. Yes, he removed the old ring, set it on the table between them, on top of the latest edition of the Agricultural Journal, which seemed about right. The first ring on top of the most recent practical work. A fitting final resting place, the new ring sat alone on her finger. She looked at it. He said, "Is it right?" She said, "Yes." Then she leaned forward and kissed him. Not a desperate thing. Not the kiss of a 12-year-old's dream finally arrived. Something better. The kiss of two people who know each other, who have sat on opposite sides of a drainage channel and argued about soil composition and read in parallel silence and made decisions together and learned, slowly, through all the ordinary materials of a shared life, that this was where they wanted to be. He put his hand on her face. She felt the warmth of him. Outside, May was doing its best work. The gardens full and the evening light long, and the kind of evening that makes a house feel like it has finally understood what it was built for. She pulled back. She looked at him. He looked like a man who had been carrying a very large thing for a very long time and had finally, with some help, set it down. She thought she probably looked something similar. "Well," she said. He said, "Well," she said, "the south boundary fence inspection is tomorrow at 8. He said, "I know, Bramford will be there, I know, and we should discuss the mill account before then because there's a discrepancy in the Cressida, yes?" "The mill account," he said, "will still be there in the morning." A pause. "Yes," she said. "It will." She settled back in her chair, but she did not pick up her book. He did not pick up his either. They sat in the evening quiet of the east sitting room, which was their sitting room, which was their house, which was their life. And she looked at the ring on her finger, and he looked at the fire. And the evening light came through the south window, and the lark that had been singing in the garden said something definitive about May, and then was quiet. She thought about 12 years old. About a crowded London street and a runaway carriage and a young man who had looked at her as if she mattered. She thought about how strange it was, that a single moment could plant something that grew for 20 years in the dark, that patience could look indistinguishable from foolishness until it didn't, that the distance between two people could close not in a single dramatic gesture, but in the accumulation of small true things. 9 candles, 30 feet of table, a locked drawer with a letter in it, a drainage channel, a book left beside hers without comment, a ring chosen because it was the right blue, small things, all of them real, all of them adding up to this. She said, "Dorian." He said, "Yes," she said. "I counted your footsteps." A pause. He said, "What?" "In the first month, when I could hear you in the corridor at night. Passing my door," she paused. "I counted. 17 times. In the first month you passed without stopping." He was quiet for a long moment. "I know," he said. She blinked. "You knew I was counting?" "No." A pause. "I knew I was passing." She looked at him. "I slowed down," he said. "Some evenings, more than others," he said it evenly, but she heard what was underneath it. "I did not know what I would say if I stopped." She held his gaze. "You could have knocked," she said. "Yes, I would have opened the door. I know that now." A silence. Then, 17, he said. "You're certain it was 17? "I counted. You are a very unusual woman. I counted everything," she said. "When I couldn't sleep, the tiles, the candles, the mornings you rode east." She paused. "It helped," he said. "How many mornings?" 11. He said nothing. She looked at him. He was looking at the fire. His jaw had that line in it. The one she had learned meant he was working through something internally, and the working through was not comfortable. She said, "It was then. It is not now." He looked at her. "I know," she said. "I believe you. I told you I believed you, and I meant it." She paused. "I just wanted you to know the full accounting. Since we are being complete," he said. "Complete," we agreed. "No managed distances. No controlled narratives." "Yes, then you should know," she said, "that I counted the mornings you rode east, and it was 11, and I am not angry about it. I simply wanted you to have the number." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am sorry for the 11, she said. "I know." She reached across the space between their chairs and put her hand on his. He turned his hand over, held hers. The fire settled. The lark was quiet. Outside, May was doing what May does, filling up the light, stretching the evenings. making the world look as though it was designed specifically to be beautiful and had been waiting patiently for someone to notice. She noticed. She let herself notice. The summer came, and with it, a different Caldwell. Not unrecognizable, still the same stone pile with the mismatched wings, and the drafty east corridor, and the kitchen garden that MacPhail managed with the religious dedication of a man for whom productivity was a spiritual practice. Still the same 200 tenants, and the mill and the south field, and the drainage channel, in the north pasture that had been, everyone agreed, an excellent decision. But different in the way that things are different when they are finally being used correctly. There were dinners. Not the stiff ceremonial affairs of winter, but actual dinners, with neighbors and conversation and wine that ran a little long, and evenings that ended with laughter. Sir Aubrey came frequently, because Sir Aubrey went everywhere frequently, and his sister Clara had become a genuine friend to Cressida, the kind of friend she had not had in years, a woman who argued with her and meant it, and was never once improved by being agreed with. Philippa came, regularly. She and Cressida had a friendship now that was honest and specific, and did not pretend that the history between them was simple, because it was not. But it was theirs, built from the truth of things, which made it, like most things built from truth, more durable than the alternative. Jasper came with her. He had opinions about the sea monster Atlas that he had communicated to Cressida over the course of several subsequent visits, in the thorough and relentless manner of a 5-year-old who has identified an adult willing to take him seriously. She took him to the library and showed him the natural philosophy section, which contained a volume on documented sea creatures of the North Atlantic that caused him to sit in absolute silence for 20 minutes, and then look up and say, with the solemnity of a man who has made a discovery, "Most of them are real," she said. "Most of them," he said. "Which ones aren't?" she said. "That's a better question." He liked that. He came back to the library 3 more times that summer. Dorian watched this from the doorway once and said nothing. She saw him watching. She left the question open, deliberately. It was not her question to answer alone. In August, Dorian rode out to meet a solicitor from York who had been engaged to formalize the documentation regarding Jasper's position. Not publicly, not dramatically, but correctly, in the records that mattered, the ones that would determine the child's future in the practical legal ways that eventually, in 20 years, would matter enormously. Piers Ashcroft's son. By name, by record. By the official instrument of an estate that was now, finally, operating from the truth of things. Dorian came home in the early afternoon and found her in the kitchen garden with MacPhail, arguing amiably about the relative merits of 2 different approaches to the autumn planting. He stood at the garden gate and waited. MacPhail saw him first and concluded the conversation with the diplomatic velocity that had become one of his most valued professional characteristics. Dorian came through the gate. She turned. He looked at her across the kitchen garden. The August light was full on him. His face, which had been the color and temperature of a February sky when she had first met him, was something else now. Still controlled. He was always going to be controlled. That was simply what he was. But the things underneath the control were visible now, not all the time, but in moments like this one. Real moments. Unmanaged ones, he said. "It's done," she said, Jasper. "Correctly documented. Everything as it should be." She let that sit for a moment. "How do you feel?" she said. He considered the question with the seriousness he gave to questions worth considering. "Like a man who has put down something he should have put down 6 years ago," he said, "and is still accounting for the weight." She walked to him. She put her hand on his chest, over his heart, where the weight presumably lived. She said, "It takes as long as it takes." He put his hand over hers. They stood in the kitchen garden in the August light, and the weight was there. Yes, and the accounting would continue. Yes, and none of the complicated things about the past were simple or fully resolved or ever going to be either of those things. And it was enough. More than enough, because here was what she had learned, over 9 months at Caldwell, over a lifetime of loving a man who did not know he was loved until someone made herself indispensable to every room he stood in. It is not the absence of difficulty that makes a life. It is the presence of someone who stays through the difficulty, who shows up in the rain, who counts the tiles when she cannot sleep, and never tells you as a complaint, only as a final accounting, a complete record, nothing withheld. Who takes the old ring off and puts the new one on and understands that both of them were real, just differently real. She was that woman. He was that man. Or becoming him. Steadily, honestly. One drainage channel and one ledger column and one late-night library conversation at a time. Good enough. Real enough. Theirs. That autumn, she did not count the footsteps. She didn't need to. He stopped at her door every evening, knocked once, came in. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they read. Sometimes the evening just happened around them, quietly. The way evenings in houses that have finally understood what they were built for tend to happen. The fire in the east sitting room burned through October and November and into December, which came early and cold that year. The tenants were warm. The cottages held. The children had shoes. She had no letter left in the locked drawer. She had opened it one evening in September and read it again. Her father's handwriting, the full weight of his regret in every careful line, and then she had sat with it for a long time. She had folded it, put it in the fire, watched it go. Aldous Vane had made terrible choices, and he had known it, and he had tried, in the only way he could imagine, to make it right. He had asked too much of her. He had not seen that asking a daughter to spend her life repairing a father's damage was its own kind of damage, but she had come anyway. And Caldwell was warm, and the man in the West Wing. Her husband, her partner, the man she had loved since she was 12 years old, standing on a London street in the path of a runaway carriage. Walked 412 feet of corridor every night to knock on her door. Every night. Without fail. Without needing to be asked. She thought that was probably the truest thing. The most complete accounting. A man who had learned to stop at the door. A woman who had stopped counting how many times he didn't. And the space between them, which had once been the whole cold length of a mismatched house, finally fully quietly closed.